Hi, my name is Dr. Provost with the Chemistry and Biochemistry Department at the University of San Diego. Today we're going to talk about centrifuge use, rotor safety, and all the things you need to do to safely and carefully use centrifugation for all the equipment in our department. So let's start with the centrifuge. So we have two super speed centrifuges used for chemistry, biology, physics, biochemistry at the university. This one is the Sorvo RC5B Plus, and the centrifuge to the right is the same centrifuge. It's a little older. It's another super speed centrifuge. It's a Sorvo RC5B centrifuge. And everything we'll talk about today is relevant for both centrifuges. So to start with, we'll take a look at this. We have a speed dial and a time. You can see that with the speed dial we have two sets of dials. We have a low limit and a high temperature limit, and it's important that these are at least 5 or more degrees apart. If the high limit is below the actual temperature, the centrifuge will not start until it cools down. So you want to make sure that you put your rotor in the instrument ahead of time so that your rotor is at the right temperature. A room temperature rotor at colder running speed will take a while to get down there and your centrifuge won't start. Most people have a problem because they forget about this and the centrifuge simply won't start if it's too low. If you set the limits too far apart, you might be able to get it started, but oftentimes there's a cycling issue and the centrifuge will eventually kick out in the middle of your run. The other thing is, though, you might want this at 4 degrees, but by turning the low range too low, too close to 0, you will likely freeze your samples. Leaving it somewhere between 5 and 10 or 15 for most samples are just fine. Be aware of what you need for your samples. All right. So if we open the centrifuge, whether it's by hand or not, you see we have a cooled centrifuge insert. It's always important to make sure that this is off when you're done using it and it's clean and dry. Right now there's some water in there from the prior user. It was left open but on, so the condensation kept freezing on the bottom of this. So what you see here is a rotating bucket centrifuge. It's screwed on from this middle screw here, and we'll talk about how to do this in another video, how to screw them on and off. With a bucket rotor such as this, a swinging bucket rotor, it's important to have all 4 rotors. You don't want to run this with only 2 buckets in that. That creates wear and tear on this. You want to make sure that your bucket's on a spinning rotor so that the bucket sits firmly and evenly, securely on the post. So just place it straight on, and then you can make sure that it tilts and functions just fine. If it's off just a little bit, it's actually a little bit hard to do that. This will eventually fly off, causing the centrifuge to fail. There are several inserts for these. These are meant for conical or falcon tubes, and we'll talk about matching the tubes to the rotor in a later event. Make sure that you have matching inserts across. These 2 must match across, and there are other inserts, so you don't have to have all 4 of the same inserts, but the 2 across each other have to balance. So you can have 2 of these purple, and you have 2 other balance sets for, let's say, smaller size tubes or just larger size tubes. All right, so that's the swinging bucket rotor. Whenever you use a centrifuge, it's important that before you start centrifuging, you fill out this form. We need to know exactly the date, the time, if it's for research or teaching. Are you using it in water, radioactive, or something else? If you have, let's say, an organic solvent, something like that. If it's the newer centrifuge, it's the plus. If it's the older centrifuge with the black top, it's just the RCB5. The type of centrifuge head needs to be on here, the speed and time, and when you start it. That all needs to be entered into the book before you start centrifuging, so that way if you have a longer centrifuge and you're not here, something fails or somebody needs to use this, if there's any questions, we'll know who's using it. Oftentimes, if somebody doesn't fill that out, somebody's running it, if there's an error, there's a failure, or if nobody knows what's going on and you've forgotten about it and you're in between classes, people will take out your samples because there's no ownership there. So it must be filled out ahead of time. Thanks.